All right, we are live. My name is Jorge Rodriguez, and I'd like to say welcome to everybody to the LTAD Summit 2016. And so just want to go over a few things. We are using technology, so if there is a problem with the toggle, make sure you refresh it, and that should usually solve some of those problems with the toggle freezing up or anything like that. Also, to get your PD certificate, make sure you take that survey at the end of this session. And you can also go to the PhysEd Summit 2016 homepage on phys-edagogy.com, and you can check out the surveys there as well. So without any further ado, I'd like to introduce Gord Zubyck, and he's going to be talking about PE and LTAD, the perfect fit. So Gord, take it away.
Thanks, Jorge. So I'm going to share with you basically the journey I've been on for the last 4 or 5 years related to what's called long-term athlete development. And long-term athlete development is a model that was created here in Canada by the Sport for Life group. But to sort of start it all off, it's the idea of having passion for what we do. And when I first started my teaching career, a big part of my passion was related to coaching. And if you heard Naomi Hartle's keynote that she delivered just recently related to her journey, it was sort of the same thing. And sometimes we come in, and here in Canada, we aren't paid for extracurriculars. It's something just extra that we do on top of our teaching day. But for me, one of the most important things was my coaching, but that meant that a lot of my time went to coaching. Every few years, I try to keep up with date, and so I went to a conference put on by Canadian Sport for Life, and it's kind of changed the journey that I'm on in terms of where I'm putting my time and my focus. So as you can see, the Sport for Life Society is recognized globally, but basically the long-term athlete development model focuses a lot with the physical literacy development. And the purpose of the Sport for Life is to improve the quality of sport and physical literacy in the world. Notice that the different groups that are associated with Sport for Life or that they're trying to address, education is one of those. And so having fun with that education system, it's an area that was really important to me in terms of what I was then introduced to. One of the things that I was made aware of attending the Sport for Life conferences was that within the world itself, we're doing quite well in terms of literacy. So you can see the countries with dark blue, high literacy rates. The problem is now obesity is becoming an issue, and you can almost see the correlation between the countries which actually have high literacy rates are actually the countries that have the highest obesity rates. And Canada being one of those, this is something that definitely concerns me. So your educated societies tend to be your least fit societies. Something else that they made really apparent is that play and movement have kind of disappeared. And so the idea of having unstructured play is going extinct. As you can see, the way the dinosaur, playgrounds often tend to be empty. Walking to school has disappeared. So there was 2,000 steps that our students used to get, they no longer get. And basically used to be told, come home when the street lights came on. You're never heard of again. So again, every night we'd come home, we'd play until it was dark and we'd come home. So a lot of the things that culturally used to exist, they've also now disappeared. Other information and data was shared. So Dr. Dean was going to do a presentation right after this. Dr. Dean shared this data and this information. And so what you're basically seeing here is motor competence between genders, so male and female. The dark blue to one side indicates that gender tended to be stronger than the other group. So in this situation, you can see that males tend to be a bit more dominant than females in terms of...
Hey, Gord. Would you mind sharing your screen so that we can also see that data?
Oh, sorry.
Yeah, we weren't able to see it the last couple slides.
Okay. Is it back? Are we good?
Okay, there you go. I can see myself.
Okay. Sorry, so if I go back up, literacy versus your obesity, and you can see which countries tended to have the higher literacy rates and sort of the correlation that exists right now with obesity as well. So you can see that connection. So our educated societies tend to be our least fit societies. And earlier, this is just an illustration of how our cultures change. And so the different types of play that did exist, the unstructured play, the physical activity, it's also disappeared in a society which often has become quite fearful of allowing their children to be outside. The motor competence slide right here, and again, Dr. Dean will do an excellent job of going into more detail about this, but there is a gender gap that's existing right now, and this is what the play tool physical literacy assessment. You'll be able to find links that'll take you to these different play tools if you want to go into this in more and more detail. But females are lagging behind boys, and overall, both genders actually overall have low competency scores. But here you can see how much stronger the males who are competent with a larger percentage than in females. So at the conference, it was also mentioned several times that we, the education system, are the most important stakeholders of all, because we're the only one that has every child in the country. So if someone's going to be able to get this done, it's going to be the education system. And so for me, this is a massive statement, because again, being an education system, right, it really made me reflect on my own practice, but on just the practice that's occurring overall. And again, it got my blood boiling. And so basically the idea here was, okay, so what can I do now to change what I do? Part of it means spending less time on extracurriculars and focusing more time on making sure that opportunities are provided for every student to be physically active, and to make sure that when I'm teaching, I'm definitely making sure that I get I'm teaching the things that are required that students need to learn. So long-term athlete development is the basic guide, and what this does, it's actually broken down the development of a child, ages and stages. Children, youth, and adults need to do the right things at the right time in order to develop for their sport or activity. Whether they want to be hockey players, dancers, figure skaters, or gymnasts, it's basically a roadmap. And so the roadmap itself provides this clear path to greater health and higher achievement. And so what you can see here is in the active start stage, this is the very beginning. It's got all the stages laid out. In some cases, it's tied to age, but we're going to talk more about developmental age a little bit later, so there can be some flexibility in that. But these are all the different steps and stages that a person has to go through in order to end up eventually, being active for life. And that's our ultimate goal. It's great that, we're going to be training, high-level athletes and those that are going to excel in sport. But in the end, the largest percentage of people end up being active for life. And so it's really important to make sure that we're doing things for all. Now, don't let the word athlete get in the way. I've had people say to me, well, we're teaching students, not athletes. There's LTAD models that have been designed. They've changed the word to participant. Hockey Canada changed the word to player. Alpine Canada skier. Basically, what we need to do is develop a long-term student development. And so when you're looking at LTAD, think of it more as LTSD in terms of long-term student development. So the presentation here is looking at LTAD. On the left side, you can see that rectangle. You can also see that in red. This is your active for life. So ultimately, in the end, that's where pretty much everybody ends up falling into, is that active for life, which is why we need to make sure that we're providing the skills that everyone needs in order to be active for life. And when you combine that with physical education, and this is our logo that we have here in Ontario for our curriculum for health and physical education, the two of these actually blend together really well. And so we're going to go through and take a look how the two are linked all the way through. For me, how this worked out was that LTAD became the skeletal base. So it provided a really good structure, a framework to break the different pieces down, and made it really easy to understand from the start to the finish. The curriculum itself then ends up being the muscles, tendons, and ligaments, which then get built onto that LTAD framework. Being a secondary teacher, I often hadn't necessarily thought a lot about the beginning, the active start, but what this has done, it's helped me have a better understanding from the beginning to the end, which has had a tremendous impact on the programming that I deliver with my phys ed classes, again, because often students are at different developmental stages. So what they've done with LTAD is they put together 10 key factors. And so these are the 10 key things that are required in order to develop a properly designed program. And so what we're going to do now is I'm going to take you through each one of these different key factors. I'm going to show you how it aligns right with the Ontario curriculum. You can do the same thing with your curriculums, which exist in your states, your countries, in terms of taking these different concepts and going in and making these links and making these ties. For me, what LTAD does is it does a good job of sorting it out. Again, that structural skeletal framework, which is much easier than sort of going through a document and trying to pull the different pieces out. First one is physical literacy, and here We do have a physical literacy consensus statement in Canada. There was a variety of different definitions that had existed. And so this just makes it a lot clearer. So basically, physical literacy is the motivation, confidence, physical competence, knowledge, and understanding to value and take responsibility for engagement in physical activities for life. So that's the standard statement that we now use. Of course, it being wordy, maybe not necessarily easy to understand, this visual does a great job of illustrating what that just said. And so you've got this continuous feedback loop whereby physical literacy, so if we build competence in our students, they'll then have the confidence, all right, to then be motivated to try new things, which then results in them being active for life. And so this is basically what we're trying to achieve through physical literacy. Being in education, a good analogy is to compare physical literacy to literacy, numeracy, and music. They're all sort of designed the same way. Whether it's literacy, ABC, numeracy 1, 2, 3, music, do, re, mi, and physical literacy, it's movement vocabulary. So it's teaching children to be able to do different movements, whether it's run, jump, throw, hop, skip, those different types of things. Once you've developed those, you can move into sequences, which is the same as words, fractions, and scale, and eventually it gets applied to tasks. Within our curriculum, on page 210, it actually has great definitions of movement vocabulary. It's really important when we're asking students to do a different movement, that we actually are having them do that proper movement. And often hop is a good example, the hop and the jump, right? With hop being on 1 foot landing, whereas your jump's a 2 foot landing. So that's a good one to think about, because often if you're like me, you've had a circuit station before which had 2 foot hopping. 2 foot hopping doesn't exist, it's jumping. So it's really important to make sure that we understand the vocabulary if we want our students to be clear on what it means as well. Another good analogy for it, so putting it into practice, so your physical literacy is your ABCs. If you're comparing it to English, physical competence would be a sentence, your specific sports skill or techniques a paragraph, and then your sports performance is the novel. Now, no one tries to write a novel before learning how to read, but often it just seems that with sport, for example, we tend to give the adult form of the sport to very young children and just expect that they're able to do it. They can muddle through it, just like they can take a novel and muddle through it, but what they're going to have in terms of benefits from doing that activity just isn't exactly what we want to have from young kids. So physical literacy itself within the Active for Life model occurs mostly during the first 3 phases. So during your active start, your fundamentals, and your learn to train. So those are the stages whereby it really gets done. But then there's also remedial physical literacy. And in some cases, it could be because it wasn't taught or it wasn't learned at the time, or developmentally, they weren't prepared for it, or it could be because they've hit puberty and there's been a lot of growth changes, in which case they have to relearn some things. And that's your remedial physical literacy. So if you're a secondary teacher like myself, that's where we're working at. We still need to know how to deliver and how to remediate physical literacy. And if you're working with the younger grades, then your active start, fundamentals, and learn to train take you through that. Within our curriculum, it's right in there. So you can see here physical literacy, the section that's in purple. It talks about it, but it also talks about multiple environments. Again, I was guilty at times of not getting outside enough, right? It was easier to control the class in the gym. It was much easier to plan. You didn't have the unpredictability of the weather, but the reality is we need to be able to provide opportunities in all of these environments for our students so they can get a full range of things. So again, ice and snow, outdoors, air, water, and ground. So it's really important to make sure we build this into what we're doing. Fundamental movement skills. So within our curriculum, stability, locomotion, and manipulation are all in there. And these are examples of those. But the big question, and often for myself again, is do students learn these by default or by design? So when we're putting together our programming, is there scope and sequence? Are we actually playing games with a focus on we're learning how to jump today? Or are we just randomly playing activities? And if we're just randomly playing activities, which might be fun, the students are moving, they're having a great time, they're sweating, but in the end, the learning isn't the same if it's by default and not by design. Within our curriculum, this talks about different activities to develop fundamental movement skills. You'll notice when you go through this, there aren't any sports mentioned here. So again, sometimes we get caught up with the sport piece and we end up focusing on those when the reality is we're looking at developing fundamental movement skills, right? Our job is to teach movement, right? Not necessarily to teach sport. So for me, this is a great document. And the ones that actually have the big red stars beside them, these are actually activities which have been designated pillar activities for developing physical literacy. So you really want to make sure that children get an opportunity to do those things. Now, some schools, they do have access to aquatics or swimming or a pool to get those things done, but many don't. So there's one that we have trouble delivering often in schools. Two is gymnastics and movement activities, which in many cases that equipment was all moved out of the schools in terms of the whole safety and health and liability issue risks. And then of course you got track and field, which is another one in which some of the events as well have also started taking on a high risk designation, which makes them tough to do. So three of the ones that are required for physical literacy in many cases, we're having trouble getting those delivered within the school system. It's really important to make sure that we're assessing things. And so if you've been searching or looking for different physical literacy assessments, here's three that exist within Canada, or designed within Canada. They can definitely be used outside of the country as well. And so you have the play tool, which is at the top, top left, which was designed by Sport for Life. And Dr. Dean will be mentioning those in his next presentation, I'm sure, when he's talking about the gender gap. The Circadian Assessment of Physical Literacy, or CAPL, you'll often hear it referred to, which goes through and looks at that. And there's also the Passport for Life, so which is by Physical Health and Education Canada. So the three of these are definitely important. If you look in the TOZL, I've actually created links to online presentations that already exist that would allow you to go through and check these out. Within Ontario, we also have access to these instructional support. So these groups and organizations do a great job of providing resources and information that's needed. And once again, if you go into the TOZL section, you will find links to all of these things, and Active for Life especially because of the lesson plan creator and the pre-made lessons that already exist. So the second key factor is excellence takes time. And you've probably heard about the 10,000 hours of training, which is about 10 years. Now keep in mind, we're not talking about 10,000 hours in one specific activity. We're talking about multi-sport being very important in terms of getting those 10,000 hours in, and a variety of different activities. Within our curriculum, it talks about students reaching their full potential, and it requires numerous opportunities. Now in Ontario, health and physical education is mandatory from K to 9. So we do have them students for 10 years. So again, if we're doing this properly, we should hopefully be able to provide or make every student physically literate so that they can then have the confidence and the competence to then be motivated to participate. I really love these MRI brain scans. And so what you can see here is these top sections of brains is that many neurons are used while we learn. So when you're first learning something, a lot of the brain is being used up. And so we're basically focusing on just one item. When we start to get better at something, what you notice is that the brain requires less neurons in order to achieve that task. And eventually when it becomes pretty much automatic, very little of the brain is then being used, which then means that you can add in different components. But this is a great illustration. And in Canada, we often use hockey as the example. There's usually at the young ages, there's one little child who's always going offside. So there ends up being this one rule whereby they're not supposed to cross the blue line before the puck. And so you have this one child that keeps doing it, and you see parents getting frustrated and they're like, why can't this child do it? Well, that child, basically, their brain is firing at the top just to skate up and down the ice. Once their brain progresses further on and frees up space, then they'll understand more rules and more details from there. So it's really important to make sure that we have our games designed so that basically we're recognizing how much brain is being used, so that we're giving activities and opportunities for students to be successful without overloading their brain. Now, how do you increase quality repetitions? So again, in order to get this stuff in, it's important to make sure that they get a chance to touch equipment or practice skills, tens, hundreds of thousands of times. So within your class, and I've often done this myself, it started off when I had a student teacher, was taking a look at how much active time there was. You want to try and get greater than 60%. It's really difficult to have the kids active for 60%. When you take out the time for getting changed, getting unchanged, some time for instruction, transitions, if you can hit 60% active time, meaning they're active for 60% of the time, you're doing a great job. 60% doesn't include standing in lines and those things. Small-sided game approach is a great way to get this done. So instead of one game being played, you've got multiple games being played. And then, of course, you've got the modified games. It doesn't necessarily have to look like the original. And for me, this is where teaching games for understanding came into play, because it really helped me to then be able to provide these opportunities. So within that idea, how do you increase the repetition? So you've got your station-based. It could be a fitness component where, again, there's stations. Here's an example of the agility challenge, which is a track and field themed one. So again, you've got basically stations going on. Or if you've seen Captain Pete, right, here's one of Captain Pete's station cards that he has designed for different things. So again, what it looks like can definitely change and can definitely vary. Within teaching games for understanding, I won't go into too much detail. There's some great presentations within Physedagogy from the previous summits that you can take a look at. And basically, we've now grouped different activities. So for example, territory invasion, you would then go soccer, basketball, hockey, or football. They're all different sports or games where the idea is to score, invade, or keep possession when you have the object, or without is to prevent scoring, prevent invasion, and gain possession. So now you can design and put together a bunch of different games which then focus on those same concepts. So again, we're not necessarily focused on teaching the game, but the common tactics and strategies that go through. And so this is just an example of how you can set up your gym, depending on the size of it, whereby in this case, if you had, let's say, 3 badminton courts and a half gym, you'd be able to run a different game on each one of those badminton courts, and then your students get some variety. There could also be a choice component, but it's a great way to do this. But again, it's small set of games with a purpose, and that's not by default, but by design. Specialization is the third key factor. It's really important that we don't specialize students before the ages of 12 to 15. Reality, what's kind of happened in society is that we kind of pushed adult training and adult models down to younger and younger kids. We do see, some results from it in terms of their improvement. The problem is long-term or long-range, it doesn't end up having the impact that we would like it to have. And so you have kids burning out and dropping out. Within the curriculum in Ontario, the word variety is used 184 times. So right there, it's then showing we want to make sure that we're doing a variety of activities, right? It shouldn't be, basketball for a month, volleyball for a month, those types of things. Get into the TGFU component, mix some things up, provide lots of variety, and that will help and engage students and hopefully address the variety of interests that exist within your classroom. Some different organizations have now also jumped on the variety piece, or like the whole multi-piece. So there's a Move Your Body resource within here in Canada. And so Gymnastics Canada, Athletics Canada, and Swim Canada got together, and they created a bunch of activities that all go together so that you don't focus. Hoops and spikes, we've got basically Volleyball Canada and Basketball Canada have gotten together to create a program. Again, it's both of those mixed together. And I think there's Nova Scotia, there's a multi-sport program going currently whereby you would sign your child up for the year, and what happens is that every 4 months they get to try a different activity. So it's really important we provide that variety, that we're not specializing our children or our students, and give them a wide variety of activities to do. Developmental age is the fourth key factor, and it's a really important one because there's actually 2 types of age. There's chronological age, which is the typical definition of age used by school sports and recreation programs. So we sort our students by year of birth. Then there's developmental age, which refers to the child's stage of physical, mental, emotional, intellectual maturity. That's where our curriculum then focuses. So our curriculum is focusing on the developmental, but our schools are now started based on chronological. And so you've got this this issue whereby you can have children, all right, who are the exact same chronological age, but then they're several years apart in terms of developmental age. So we need to be able to teach or address or to have our classrooms set up, right, to meet the needs of all these different children. Within Ontario, what happened is we actually have had a shift. So right now, physical education is student-centered, right, and it's skill-based, right? So at one time, it was more of a content-focused approach, whereas now it's a skill-based approach. So this allows for differentiation of instruction. Just like we would in any other classroom, it's important that we differentiate within our gymnasiums so that when we're providing quality physical health education, we can do that. It's in our curriculum. It talks about modifying as needed. Important that all children get to progress at their own rate. And again, how do we do things like that? Well, in some cases, Calvin kind of figured it out. So in the striking activity, starts off with a small ball, goes and gets himself a beach ball. It's a great example of what we can do to simply modify things. The other component is thinking about equality versus equity, right? Equality means everybody gets the same piece of equipment. Equity means that they would get the piece of equipment that allows them to be successful. So thinking about things a little bit differently from this component is really important. Going back to the Calvin idea, I was playing a game, so it was like a modified handball, whereby the target was a ball sitting on a cone, and the students then had to knock the ball off the cone. And so the first time we had played it, I actually used a Swiss or an exercise ball, so a large ball, so the target was quite easy to hit. And then the next time we played, I used a smaller ball. And often what I do is I'll sort my groups based on ability level. They self-sort, so they go competitive or not so competitive. And the not so competitive group actually came and asked to get the Swiss ball back. And I had no problem with that. They came, put the big ball back on as the target. Because they were able to hit it, they were successful, they had more fun. They were still basically working on the same team concepts, team components. They were still throwing. It just provided some motivation for them to continue to be engaged in that activity. So it's really amazing what kids will do when you provide them with an opportunity or the equipment available to modify things to where they're at and where they're comfortable and where they're going to have fun and be successful. The fifth key factor is sensitive periods. I love these sensitive periods. So if you like the science aspect of health and physical education, this is where more of the science comes in. It's what the science is focusing on here is that we have speed, skill, strength, flexibility, and stamina. These 5 things actually have sensitive times or appropriate times in which the body is like a sponge and will absorb, will absorb at a much greater rate these different things. So what's first of all important to remember is that all systems are always trainable. So you can train all of these things at different stages. But again, there's an optimal time, and I refer to it as the sponge stage, right? So that's the stage where the body's like a sponge, and it will soak it right up. So what it does is, here you can see in this diagram, is it's sort of showing, where the child develops and goes through, and then it runs through what's called PHV, which is the peak height velocity. So that's that growth spurt component phase. So when you then know when that occurs, you can then get an idea as to which window of opportunity is then open, for your students. And there's actually a PHV calculator on the University of Saskatchewan website, which can help you out with this if you wanted to try and get more detail. But basically, as we're going through, you'll notice that suppleness, which is your flexibility, really the sponge time for our students is when they're younger. It's sort of the age 5 through 9 to 10. All right, and then again, personally, there was a time when I thought, oh, they're young, they're flexible, we don't need to work on this. But it actually turns out that the body, again, is most receptive during that phase. Early on, you've got speed phase, and there's 2 different speed phases. So this is speed 1. Speed 1 refers to agility. So that's your cutting, your changing direction. It's nothing to do with your anaerobic energy systems, running fast in a straight line. This is about being able to cut, to move, change directions, those types of things. That's something else that needs to occur early on. Then you've got skill development. So your fundamental movement skills. This is the optimal time, to start working on your throwing, your catching, your running, your jumping. So more specific skills from that component or that piece. Then you move into the next case, it's speed 2, and stamina. So speed 2, now you're looking more at anaerobic, you're running quickly, straight line, those types of things. And then stamina kicks in, so that's your cardiovascular, so that's the optimal time to work on that. And then it finishes off finally with strength, So this is the case of building the different strength within your child, so resistance training, that type of stuff. Again, they're always trainable, so you'll work them in at different stages, but this is the optimal time. You may have noticed that up here for females and males, that they occur at different times, which is really important because, again, if you have a co-ed phys ed class, are you actually providing what the females need in your class, and the males need at those appropriate times? Again, if it's one program fits all, you'll notice that you're missing out on the optimal times or the optimal windows to actually be meeting the needs of those students for what they're ready for at that point in time. And strength's a great example because for females, it occurs much sooner, much earlier, than it does for males. Within the LTAD, they break it down quite well. And so these are the sensitive periods. And so with an active start, it's play-based activities, it's basic movement skills, running, jumping, throwing, and the executive functioning, which we'll get to in a little bit in a few minutes here, in terms of development of the brain. Then you've got fundamentals. So you got in that stage, which is sort of approaching your 6 to 9 ages, more focus on fundamental movement skills. ABCs of athleticism, your agility, your balance, coordination, and your speed, and your basic flexibility exercises. And then learn to train, now it becomes general sport-specific skills. Now you're developing strength using exercises with the child's own body weight, as well as med ball and Swiss balls. And you're introducing hopping and bounding exercises, or different routines to aid in strength and power development. So why I love LTAD for me is because the stages provide the outline of the structure that you need to be providing. So here, basically, if you're teaching those different ages or those different groups, right, this is basically what you're supposed to be getting done. And it explains the why. Why should it happen at this age? Because they've taken the science, and that's the sponge time. That's that sensitive period. Here in Canada, what's happened is that many of our sport organizations have actually looked at the different ages. And so here again, you've got your active start, fundamentals, and learn to train. And they've created appropriate programming that basically ties into those ages. So whether it's rocks and rings or progressive tennis or run, jump, throw, rally cap, etc., all of these programs have been created and designed based on what the developmental age of that child would be at that point in time, and based on what was laid out in terms of active start, fundamentals, and learn to train in terms of what should be done and what should be covered. And so a lot of these programs are available, in which you can then take these programs and apply those to your physical health education classes by running these programs for your students within your classes. Previous slide, sorry. So on this slide here, you can actually find a link in the TOZL. There's a bunch of stuff in the TOZL, but the entire page is in TOZL, which shows you the different programs that are available for the different stages of LTAD. So cognitive and emotional development is a huge component as well, and it's really important that we look at the holistic approach. All right, so our students, basically, it's more than just being fit, it's more than just being active. It's also, you know, ethics, fair play, character building, and just making sure that our students socially are building skills as well. So it's really important to make sure we cover those things, and this is recognized within Sport for Life. We all know that our brains are much better when we're active, and so again, MRIs, so you see in this case, without movement, they have brain activation, and then after movement, how much more active the brain is. We've tied this to better scores when testing. We've tied this to better mood, motivation, confidence. All these things have been tied to it. And so it's really important that our kids are active because of the positive effects that it has on our brain. Study stuff that's coming out from Sport for Life and LTAD. There's some draft documents they're working on is brain development. And so this is really exciting because now it's taking a look at, so how are we using physical activity to actually develop the brain? And so what you have in this case is executive functioning, and executive functioning is made up of 3 different components. So one of those components is self-regulation, another one is cognitive flexibility, and the third is working memory. So again, being a high school teacher, you think of a game like Simon Says, you think, no, it's kind of juvenile, right? It's kind of young. What's the purpose of it? Well, what Sport for Life has done for me is now brought out the purpose of things. So self-regulation, basically the idea here is that you'd play anticipation games in which the child has to suppress his or her response until a signal is given. For example, Simon Says. So now this actually explains what the purpose is of a game like Simon Says. You're now developing self-regulation. We are noticing that the earlier slide I showed about, you know, activity being gone, kids aren't playing outside, kids aren't walking to school, our kids seem to be having a tougher time self-regulating as well. So it's really important to make sure we play games such as Simon Says in that way. Cognitive flexibility. So again, the idea is you got games that require quick changes, such as statues. So children are having to switch between thinking about moving and thinking about being absolutely still. We're now developing a cognitive flexibility when we play games such as that. Working memory, the third part of executive functioning, is when you're playing a game such as head and shoulders, knees and toes. So basically following leader games where there's a sequence of actions that gets longer and longer, all right, you're basically working on a child's working memory. So it's really important to make sure that we are aware of what we're doing. Again, it's by design and not by default, but being able to explain how these games can develop the child's brain will also help when we're going to administrators and we're trying to get more time for this type of thing. Or within our own classroom, you can go, you know, cross-curricular. You're playing one of these activities within an English class. And you can basically, you know, you can show how by taking time to play that game, you're actually developing the child's brain and the child's executive functioning. So for me, this is really exciting stuff, and I find it really interesting. Really important, again, in this whole self piece is that we have some student voice. There's some self-assessment. How you do that could look a little bit different. One could be a situation whereby, again, you've got some different statements, and the child then circles the emoticon that goes with it. Emoticons are great for younger students. For my older students, we simply have them rank, 1 through 5, those types of things. But getting that student voice and that self-assessment, it tells you how students are feeling about themselves. It tells you how they're thinking about the different activities that you're doing, so that you can then address or adjust different things in your class to meet some of the emotional things that they may be feeling. In the end, it's important that in this area of this mental confidence, that we do build this confidence. And so it's a path of fun and a challenging road, right? You have to have some failure, right? The idea that we get rid of failure isn't true. The trick is we just want to make sure that we have some failures, but it's a challenging road, but it's designed appropriately. The lesson plans are designed to enhance confidence. It's not just about having fun, all right? And that's, again, is it by default or by design? So this confidence will be attained if we can make sure we control peer pressure, right? So you should never have a single activity with everybody watching, right? Again, playing one game of volleyball with one ball is a great example of how you're putting a child on the spot, right? And for many kids, it's easier to just not move your feet and not make a play in the ball than it is to try to actually hit the ball and then fail at hitting it. So if we can make sure we do things with multiple stations and many students moving at once, it eliminates that whole audience component, that whole peer pressure piece. So if you can observe, if observers are minimized, it creates that anonymity. Anonymity then leads to a more safe environment in which your learners will engage and try things. Inclusion and selection is also important. So it's important that your stations allow some students to select maybe a starting station, so you're incorporating some choice. Right? There's multiple activities at that station, but allowing choice can instill motivation to participate and creates ownership. So again, we have control over a lot of these different things that occur in terms of the mental and the cognitive, and making it a nice safe space for students to participate in. Periodization is planning. So periodization, if you're looking from the sport world, it's laying out the training, looking at when it's going to peak, those types of things. So if we look at planning, it's time management. And so as a planning technique, we need to make sure we do this. And it's important to make sure that we've got a schedule that's been designed for optimal improvement. So we're basically got some scope and sequence, and things are being learned by design. Within our Ontario curriculum, it talks about that. It looks about readiness to learn, understanding your students' interests, recognize their learning styles and preferences, and then planning effectively, right, in order to get that done. One of the previous presentations this morning already talked about, if you do the same thing over and over year after year, right, things kind of get boring. But again, should never happen again, because basically we're supposed to know our students, right, and what they need, and we should be planning to meet the needs of the students we currently have in our classes. Think about, many of you here may be full-time PE teachers. Many of you may be classroom teachers, and you're only going to be teaching maybe your students for 130, maybe 20, 30, 40-minute block during a day. So if the case is whereby you teach more than one subject area, how much time do you spend planning lessons for that subject? So for your literacy, your numeracy, and your physical literacy, how much time goes into preparing before you have that lesson? If we think about which one provides the greatest holistic benefits, so all the stuff we've seen so far on brain development, and self-esteem and making us feel better, I mean, in the end, you can say that physical literacy probably has the greatest holistic benefit. This is an image shared from Ted Tamertzigo and Dr. James Mandigo. And so what they basically done is it's kind of like Christmas dinner. And so often what ends up happening is that we have the adult table, and often our numeracy, our literacy, and our science, they end up at the adult table, whereas our things like music or art or dance, physical education, and drama, they end up at the kids' table. And it's unfortunate in many ways, because the ones at the kids' table, these are where the creative processes come from. And so these are the course where the students get to express themselves and show that creativity. So it's really make sure that we're not just focusing on the head table. It's important to make sure that we're focusing on this part of the table here, because as we're seeing with society and jobs of the future, it requires creativity. It requires thinking outside the box and those types of things. So it's important to make sure that we give just as much time, right, to those arts down below as we do to the different main core subjects, we often call them, that get to sit at the head table. Because in my mind, phys ed, for sure should be a core subject based on all those benefits that it has. So it's important when planning, a yearly plan, could be TGFU themed or fitness themed or fundamental movement skill themed. You know, health units with final comes to mind. Your monthly plan obviously becomes more detailed, what you're doing each week within your themes. And then, of course, a daily plan which has specific details about what will be happening in class. And it's a step towards intended goals. Again, my big thing is by design and not by default. So the more that we can do phys ed this way, the more effective it's going to be. This is a slide. This actually comes from Dr. Dean, again, I mentioned it presenting in the next round. And so this was a study that they did using what's called the Run, Jump, Throw program, and that was designed by Athletics Canada. And so what you can see is that the baseline was from 8 schools. So they did sort of some physical literacy assessments using the play tools. And they had 4 control schools and 4 intervention schools. So after 12 weeks of the one school using Run, Jump, Throw, so the intervention schools and the control schools, they just kept doing what they were doing. What you'll notice is that within the schools that did the Run, Jump, Throw, there was a dramatic increase, okay, in their physical literacy competence. Whereas what you'll notice is that the other schools that basically just kept doing what they were doing, it kind of stayed the same. So for me, what this illustrates is the power behind a properly planned program that has scope and sequence. All right, the benefits are much richer when we have scope and sequence than when things are just random. And again, in the arms, these kids, they might have been happy, they might have been having fun, they might have been sweaty. All right, but again, without that scope and sequence, all right, their actual improvement in terms of skill ability, it just wasn't the same. So this is a great example of when you have a properly planned program, the extra benefits that you can achieve from it. So some tips and tricks. It's important to make sure your format's taken care of. You're structured, you're unstructured, your environment, again, ground, air, water, outdoor, snow, ice, indoors. Now you may be from perhaps a location where snow and ice may be a bit more difficult, but it's important to make sure we try to get our students out and get them exposed to all these different environments. So the intent, right, it's having a focus, an objective, or an outcome, all right, really important. Is it the outcome or the process, right? Process is often the most important piece, right? What they're going through, what they're learning, those types of things. Your people and your groupings, limiting your wait times, limiting lineups, all right? Putting students into groups they're comfortable with. Your spacing equipment, so keeping things nice and safe and organizing your stations and those types of things. Activity levels, so trying to get to 60 minutes. Here in Canada, we're looking at trying to have all students active for at least 60 minutes a day. And then competition's another one. It's more than just, yes, there's competition, or no, there's competition. It's kind of complicated, and we'll talk a bit more about that in a second. But there's always competition. We as humans compete every day on this planet for survival. So you're never going to eliminate competition, but what it looks like ends up changing. And then again, do it with intent. So make sure you're doing something, make sure there's a purpose to it. And again, all of that with fun and comfortable, right amount of challenge ends up with success. And again, failing to plan is simply planning to fail. So there's a competition piece. So in order to engage learners, competition needs to be meaningful. So meaningful doesn't mean it has to look like traditional competition. It doesn't have to involve a championship, all right? So often that's where I differentiate between the two. We often think of competition being a championship model, meaning teams are playing, teams are winning so that they can move on, all right, to then play further on. Really, competition is students, competing against each other, and the result is the result, but it doesn't necessarily have to lead to something following. So again, keeping this competition as developmentally appropriate and inclusive is really important. So it could mean modifying the size of the field. It could be modifying the number of players in each team. Again, the fewer number of players in each team there are, the more touches that will be achieved, right, which then achieves greater results in terms of development. Competition needs to be progressed, so it's important to start off slowly and then work it through. Eventually, it can look like a championship model, but don't start off with the championship model in the beginning. It's inappropriate to use adult competition and then apply it to all students as well, and that's that modifying based on developmental age and what needs to be done. And then this should be factored into your development of lesson plans, right? The reality is we could play rock, paper, scissors right now, you'd be competing, right? So it's important, again, to think about competition, what it looks like, and how it plays out. Rock, paper, scissors is actually a great competition to do in phys ed because the winner isn't based on necessarily a skill component, right? It's a random chance thing. And I've done rock, paper, scissors group activities whereby the final winner was a student who wasn't one of the students in class whose physical literacy skills were as, let's say as high as others or as elite. And it was just funny that the smile on their face to having won that was awesome, was amazing. So number 9, the key factor is system alignment and integration. So basically, it's important to make sure that we try to get everybody on the same page. And so that's what the hope and the purpose is of long-term athlete development and sport for life, is we can get coaches and teachers and recreational professionals all going through the programming. But it's important that we're supported by our administrators, our sports scientists, health, and government. So government provides curriculum. They provide different resources. Health does. In fact, there's so much out there right now. It's awesome in terms of the supports that are there. And again, back in the TOZL, you'll see I put all kinds of different links to different organizations that have their LTAD models and those things laid out. Within our curriculum in Ontario, we actually have these learning summaries at the back of the curriculum, and they're by strand, and they're really good. It basically, again, it goes into the different movements we focused on at the different grade levels and different stages, and it shows you that progression. So it has that scope and sequence that's really required in order to have a successful program. So in this case, if you're in Ontario, and does your school use these summaries, or are using the summaries and things that are provided, all right, within your own, let's say, state, country as well? Is it backwards by design or design down, meaning you have the end in mind in the beginning and you're working your way back? Do you do common units? So again, if it's something that requires a lot more setup and you've got many students or many teachers going through the gym, do you plan this commonly? So the first teacher sets it up and the last teacher takes it down. Are you using physical literacy and fitness assessments to guide your instruction, right? So then see what your students' needs are. And again, there's links to some of these as well within the TOZL as well. And then if this isn't happening, how do you convince your fellow teachers of the benefits of working together and using these tools? And that's the biggest piece. Collaboration is huge, right? And when we all work together, the outcome of the product that we can create much more effective. And the last one's continuous improvement. So we never assume that LTAD is actually in its current form ever complete or final. And again, it's the statement earlier on, like our phys ed lessons should never look the same from year to year to year. They should always be changing, always improving based on the new stuff that's arriving. So it's important to make sure we do that. LTAD is in its second version, so LTAD 2.0. And again, there's an actual copy of that in the TOZL that you can go through to get more detail on these different items. But things are always changing. Something that came from the Incomplete Manifesto for Growth by Bruce Ma was forget about good. So again, when I was coaching, right, I was thinking, okay, my phys ed classes are pretty good. I was spending a lot of time on my coaching. It was sort of how I was justifying it. But thinking about it this way now, if good is what we all agree on, then there's no growth. And the growth mindset is huge right now. So it's important to make sure that we actually do have that growth mindset. Because if we don't, if we just stick to good, you're never going to have real growth. And the continuous improvement piece is also in our curriculum. So in Ontario, it talks about teachers reflecting, right? Attitudes, biases, seeking out different resources, different opportunities, such as physiology, for example, the summit, right, to improve on what it is they're doing. If you are in Ontario and you're getting your annual learning plan will be coming up in the first month that you're supposed to prepare, technically, and I learned this from a principal, but if you were to actually work into your annual learning plan that you would like to attend a conference, your principal then is supposed to then support you in terms of getting to that. Now, it doesn't mean that they're going to pay for it, but they would probably then have to release you, right, to bring in a sub to then cover you. So if there is a specific professional development activity you'd like to attend, put that in your ALP, and then you can push that through with your principal, because legally they're supposed to support you in your development. So again, thank you very much for choosing to attend today. It demonstrates your interest in growing. In this statement here, where it's a beautiful thing when a career and a passion come together, and it truly is. And so the last 4 years of my journey, with the shift more of my passion to the instruction of physical and health education, it has been beautiful, and it has been a lot of fun and really exciting. And thank you very much today to Physiology, and thank you very much to those who attended to allow me to share some of my growth and the journey that I've been on in the last 4 years.
All right. Well, thank you so much for attending this session, and thank you, Gord, for coming on and sharing all your information about physical literacy. I think that's awesome, and I love the way you broke that down. If anybody has any questions, you can type them into the TOZL, and we can cover some of those questions if anybody wants to. We got a couple minutes here, and if anybody wants to ask any questions, you can do that. So Gord, you still there?
Yeah, I'm still here. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I just can't see you.
Okay, so I need to go to my screen share again, maybe?
Yeah, just unshare the screen and then we can see you again. So I'm looking at the toggle. There's a lot of thank yous, a lot of great information. And if you guys look down on the toggle, there's all the resources that we were talking about during the session. And you can also get a copy of the PowerPoint. You can download that. So like I said, if you scroll down from the toggle, there's all that information on there and all those resources that we were talking about during the session. All right. Okay, so I mean, there's a lot of a lot of great information here. It doesn't look like there's a lot of questions though. Let me scroll up a little bit. Okay, what would be the first step that you would recommend to go LTAD?
Well, the first step, I guess, depending on their knowledge of LTAD, would be to go into the LTAD 2.0 document and to sort of read through it and see what it is. If they're talking about more sports specific, within one of the files I attached, it has links. So, for example, it'll actually take them to the LTAD models for, let's say, Soccer Canada or Hockey Canada or Ringette Canada, those types of things. And so it often has the programs laid out that they can use. So I'm not sure if that's what they meant. But again, so first step is if you're trying to get familiar with LTAD, we go to LTAD 2.0. And if you're looking for more sports specific, then you can dive right into the LTAD models that are created by the sport organizations here within Canada.
Okay. All right. Well, it looks like I'm scrolling up and down from this from the chat, and like I said, a lot of people are thanking you for all the great information, all the great resources. So, on behalf of PhysEdGo, thank you for coming on, and thank you for sharing all this great information. For the audience out there, if you want to fill out that survey, that's how you can get your professional development certificate. So go to physpedagogy.com/physed and you will be able to click on that feedback survey and give us some feedback, let us know how we're doing so that we can also improve the next Phys Ed Summit. So Gord, thank you so much for coming on, and everybody out there, have a good day, good evening, good night, wherever you are in the world, and thank you for tuning in.
Thank you, Jorge.